Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Backshed Bible Study today. It's episode number 107 on May, I think it's the 16th, 2022. Good to have you here along with us. Welcome. I want to welcome Phil Darke to the Backshed today. Phil, welcome to my shed.
Hey, it's great to be here. I already messed up on the live. I said, hey, way too early. So I apologize.
It's all
but
right.
It is the 16th. So I'm going to confirm that. So
I'll take care of it all in post. Okay. Hey, this is a good one to have you on board here today. Phil, I've known you for several years. Our kids have interacted, and fun time in Washington, D.C., where your daughter and your wife were on the same trip that Peter and I went on. But you and I got to talking not too long ago, and we said this would be really fun to have you here on the Backshed, and I would love to have my audience get to know you a little bit better, because I think you have some pretty cool stuff that you're a part of. So let's start a little introduction. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now, and we're going to wander all over the place, I know. Sure. In this whole conversation, but tell us a little bit about your shtick. What are you up to in ministry? How's God working?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first ministry is at home, and you talked about my wife and my daughter. That is one of 5 kids, so that's my first full-time job. So I've had that. Been blessed with an amazing family. Becca and I got married nearly 22 years ago, so it was December 30th of 2000. Keeping it nice. Easy to remember how many years, perfect. Whatever year we're in. It's pretty awesome. So that's that. Providence World is an organization that I have the amazing privilege to be able to run, and we are working with orphan and vulnerable children all around the world. We had a community in Honduras for about 20 years. We handed that off to another organization a couple of years ago. And really what God's brought us to is working with disciple-making ministries, particularly sports ministries, church planting ministries as well, to help them understand best practices for loving orphan and vulnerable children, which really is preventing them from happening, to the extent that we can help families stay together, strengthen families and communities. And this is particularly around the world. This is mostly in different parts of the globe other than the United States and the Western world. But it's really to be able to work with those orphan or sports ministries, disciple-making ministries, church planting ministries, to understand that orphanages really aren't the answer to the problem. Orphanages actually tend to create more orphans, ironically, around the world.
Yeah, and this is something you and I were talking about before we went on live here, is this concept that ministries might plop down into a country, and one of the first things that they do is to open an orphanage, and you're telling me, hey, that's kind of counterproductive.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and one of the reasons that is I was at a thing at the United Nations a couple of years ago. It's in connection with the General Assembly. We had a meeting of about 40 of the global leaders of the church on orphan care, and there was a guy from Kenya, and they asked him. They said, when people come to you and say, what do you need funding on? He said, we don't tell them necessarily what we need. We tell them what we know they'll fund, and we know churches in America will fund orphanages. And orphanages are really easy to keep going too, because people like to fund orphanages. It's very easy to say, for $20, for $40, for $100, for $200 a month, you can fund a kid. Well, the problem with that is, in these countries, the way they keep kids in these orphanages, they keep their numbers up to keep the funding coming in, is families send their kids to the orphanages. So there's actually a saying in the orphan care world that orphanages don't exist because there are orphans. Orphans exist because there are orphanages.
That just is one of those things. If that doesn't send kind of chills down your spine in a bad way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you look at the stats, it's even more chills. Like 80 to 90%, depending on the country, of children in orphanages have living family members.
Well, Phil, we came up against this in our adoption process ourselves, because obviously we've adopted internationally, and our daughter Amelia was in an orphanage at one point before that, however, and I think you'll be fairly familiar with what I'm going to talk about. Before we got into the China program, we were lined up to adopt out of Ethiopia. And as we got all of our paperwork turned in, within a couple of weeks of us getting everything in our dossier and everything submitted, Ethiopia shut down international adoptions, where they started processing 10% of the adoptions they had been doing. And what we found out, that it was just wrought with corruption, that there were people that were bringing their children or their nieces and nephews to orphanages and getting them into the system. And then they're being told that they were going to go away to the US to be until they were 18 and sent back.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And worse than that, those orphanages directors were going into the communities and out in the rural villages, and they were telling them, we will pay you $1,000 for your child, and we will bring your child to the orphanage. They will get adopted to the United States. Like you said, they will be raised up, and then they'll come back and they will pay for you. They'll have great jobs, and they'll be able to take care of your family.
Right.
Now, the people on the other side, you being one of those families who was in that system, were told that these were actual orphans, double orphans, no parents, no family, no grandparents, nobody. And then they'd come to the United States. And I've heard firsthand stories from these families who came back, their child 3 years into them fully adopting them, said, we're talking about their mom and their dad. And they said, what do you mean your mom and your dad? Didn't they died in this instance because they actually were told the backstory of how these parents, quote unquote, died,
right,
even though they were still living. And so they'd say, what are you talking about? Your parents, they died in a car accident or whatever. And they said, no, I lived with my mom until I was like a year ago, or, and then the parents are just floored.
Right.
Could you imagine the trauma of the child, of the parents in Ethiopia, of the parents in the United States? This is all causing, and it's trafficking. I mean, it's human trafficking. There's no other word for it. And that's why they shut down the program. Now, the hard part is adoption isn't a bad thing. Adoption is a great thing.
Right.
It's part of the answers. It's a tool in our tool belt to be able to take care of the orphan crisis. Now, the problem is we could do adoption, not problem. The thing is, we could do adoptions so much better. As I was talking about, if we can get these churches to understand that the answer, the disciple making organizations to infuse into their training, if we can come into these communities and build up the families and alleviate poverty in these families, which is one of the biggest reasons they're putting the kids into the orphanages. Right. If we can get better schools in these communities so that the parents can actually afford it and send their kids to schools, they can not only take care of their own families, but there are stories like with Hope International and other great organizations. If you look at the book I was able to write with about 15 co-authors called In Pursuit of Orphan Excellence, has a chapter on poverty alleviation.
All right, I'm going to add that to the show notes. Okay.
Yeah, please do. And in that has a chapter that Peter Greer, who's the president of Hope International, is a good friend of mine, and he's told story after story of these communities that not only do they alleviate poverty and they strengthen the families through that poverty alleviation to take care of their own children, but most of those families, when they understand these principles, they actually end up adopting and bringing into their families these children. So you take care of all the orphans in these communities without an orphanage, way cheaper, way better, and these families are staying together.
Right.
So we need to be doing more of that, getting more innovation, getting more people that are, and it's not even innovation, it's actually going back to what we used to do, which is strengthening families, right? But because unfortunately, in the United States, our families have broken down so much, we don't even see that as a thing that we're doing anywhere. We're modeling family breakdown here in the United States.
It's not a priority in our culture.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's tragic is what it is. And that leads to trafficking, because where there is money, there will be corruption. Right. And so there is money in these children, unfortunately. It's a
Yeah.
crass way to say it, but
No,
that is the
it's
brass tacks.
totally true. Yeah. I
Yeah.
wrote here in the title for today's episode, I called it "How Can Soccer Help Orphans?"
Mm,
So,
yeah.
uh, so
I
tell me a
love it.
little
I
bit,
love the tease. That's just a hook.
right?
You're good at this. You've been doing this for a while. You got over 100 episodes. You know how to
Over 100,
title these things.
you got to have something to keep them
Yeah.
coming back,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So soccer, I do podcasts as well. So I have a podcast called Think Orphan. So if all that I've been talking about is interesting to you and you're out there and you're like, wow, I want to learn more about this, we have almost 200 episodes of Think Orphan. I think we're at 198 episodes. We're coming up on 200. Just crazy. Boy, we have experts from around the world who are talking about these issues deeper than we could ever go into here. And those people have hours of other things they've done that you can go and you can learn as much as you want to know. Think Orphan is a great place to start. You can go check that out. I also have a podcast called How Soccer Explains Leadership. And so when we talk about this, we talked about those disciple making ministries that are going and doing amazing things around the world. A lot of those ministries that are disciple making are sports ministries. And the reason being, think about it. If you throw a ball on the field, and especially a soccer ball around the world, outside the United States, soccer is the number one sport, not even close. If you go to India, cricket is the number one sport. But outside of a few countries, soccer is it. Okay. You throw a ball on the field, kids come. You throw a ball on the field, adults come. People come, and you actually start building trust with those people. When you play a sport with someone, when you go out there, your demographics, whatever the demographic, religion, race, age, how much money you make, that goes out the window. You're playing a sport, you're playing a game. And actually, usually the people who make the least amount of money, who are lowest inside, are the best because they're playing a lot
Right.
more.
Yeah.
So they actually have more credibility on the field. So what that does is it breaks down these barriers, it breaks down walls, so we can actually start relationship and start potentially doing life together. So we talk about soccer. Actually, I'm using cricket in my neighborhood because in Folsom, these people show up at the park and they play cricket. And they're from all of the world has come to Folsom through Intel and other organizations. Yeah. And so I learned cricket. I knew nothing about cricket 4 years ago when I went to India. I saw that's all they played. That's all they watched. I mean, big, huge, massive walls of cricket just being played. I knew nothing about it. So I started learning that sport. And soccer is the exact same thing. If you don't know soccer, you can learn it. It's an easy game to just go out and play. Cricket's not, I mean, it's probably pretty easy when you know it, but I've learned it. And now I'm able to go over to this park and just start talking about Kohli, this guy over in India. He's a player. This Smith guy from Australia. And I just learn enough to start conversations with these people. And all of a sudden, we're able to have conversations. And then that leads to, oh, yeah, where are you from originally? Oh, yeah, I'm from Pune. I'm from Bangalore. I'm from Hyderabad. I'm from wherever in India or Pakistan or Afghanistan, other places that, we can't go to these countries for lots of reasons right now. And we sure as heck can't go to these countries right now and share the gospel freely. But we can go and we can have conversations with people and not have ulterior motives. I genuinely want to get to know these people. And then hopefully we'll start doing life together. I'm going to bring in my son. My youngest is 11. Bring him out there to play with those kids and their kids. And then we have them over for dinner. And then we start talking about their worldview and who they are and what their background is. That is how. And then from there, talk about orphan care, to keep going down that line. When we start transforming lives and renewing minds, people start going, it's not just about me. How can I help others? When we start helping others, we start looking, if we become Christians, we start looking at what is God's heart. God's heart is father of the fatherless, protector of widows, right? He loves these kids more than we ever will. So if we start strengthening families and we start alleviating poverty and we start doing life with people around the world, we can model what families are and what families look like. And that's why when I talk with people all the time about orphan care and prevention, I say orphan care starts in your home with your biological families. Because if you're not modeling what a family looks like in your home, then it's really hard to strengthen families elsewhere.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, that's really good, Phil. What got you into this in the first place? Okay, because you were not trained professionally to do orphan care. Okay.
Nope.
uh you were a lawyer.
I
Okay,
was.
so how does one go from doing everything it takes to become a lawyer? And I mean, that's not a minor education to just set aside to go do something else in ministry. Walk us through that process for you.
Yeah, my mom actually, interestingly, my mom, who unfortunately passed away last year, said to me when I left, she goes, "Why are you wasting your law degree?"
Hmm.
Ironically, I still use my legal skills and my legal training every day in what I do. Legal training, if nothing else, it teaches you how to spot issues
Uh-huh.
amongst a lot of noise and a lot of other things going on, and that's what I'm doing. All these things I'm talking about, if you really take it back and you peel back the onion, it's just spotting what are the issues around the world. So that's kind of, fast forward to, it took me about 4 years to realize why God brought me out of the law into what I'm doing now. But when you talk about book, podcast, all these other things,
Yeah.
it's spotting issues and help others see those issues well. So lawyers basically take all these really hard things and they bring it down to a comprehensible whole for people who are not lawyers to understand. That's what you should be doing as a lawyer. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily what happens all the time. Sometimes
Right.
they make it more convoluted, but that's ideally, as
Yeah.
lawyers, what you should be doing is helping a layman who's not a lawyer understand all these really hard things.
Yeah.
That's what hopefully I'm able to do in the orphan care space and in these other areas. Going back, the short version of a much longer story that we don't have time for. I know this is only a 30-minute show. So the short of it is, I was a lawyer. I was at a point where I read Desiring God and Don't Waste Your Life, great books by John Piper on life is mission. And so I started saying, how can I use my legal skills for the kingdom? What does that look like? I
Yeah.
read another book by Gary Haugen, who's with International Justice Mission,
Right.
and it was called Good News About Injustice. And it was basically in
Yeah.
2004 or so, when I was going through this. It's not a midlife crisis. It wasn't a crisis. It was just, how can I use my skills?
You
And
weren't old enough back
I
then to have a
wasn't old
midlife
enough,
crisis.
and I fortunately haven't had a midlife crisis. I've just
No.
had midlife, transitions, which are great. Boy, I look at it and go, all right, Lord, what do you have for me? And so I read this book on. It was back in 2004 when human trafficking wasn't really talked much about, but I read this book, and it was all about how he left his work with the Department of Justice, and he was on loan to the UN, and he went and researched the Rwandan genocide and all these other tragedies around the world. And he then started International Justice Mission to fight injustice. And anti-trafficking was one of those things that he was doing. And so I learned about that. And I actually applied to do pro bono work for IJM back then, International Justice Mission.
Well,
They
and
didn't,
I
yeah,
remember IJM. The
yeah.
first time I was exposed to them was probably 2001,
Hmm.
2002 on a trip over to Thailand,
Yeah.
and I met a couple of lawyers over there who had taken their law degrees and were helping get girls out of trafficking
Yeah. Yep.
over there. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I actually, that's when you say Thailand, because they said the only pro bono work we have right now is if you want to go to Cambodia with your family and fight against the stuff. And we had just had our third kid at that point, who's now junior in high school. So that tells you how
That's
long ago it
crazy.
was. And yeah, the kids who are still at Summit weren't even born. They weren't even in the picture. And so I started reading that book, and then I started doing more and more research into it. The long of the short is, God showed me the connection between the trafficking and the orphan care back then, which
Mm,
that was well before the Ethiopia stuff that you were talking
right.
about, well before all these other things. So I started issue spotting then. Unbeknownst to me, God was going to lead me into orphan care. But like you said, it made no sense, 0 sense for me, a lawyer from Mission Viejo, California, suburbia of suburbia, with parents who were married for 52 years until my mom passed away. For my wife and her family, her parents are celebrating their 50th anniversary. In fact, we had their vow renewal on June 4th. It made no sense. No adoption in our families, no foster care in our family until after I got into this. Interestingly, all of that. My brother just adopted my brother-in-law. There was tragedy there. My in-laws now raise his kids. All this stuff's going on. None of that was going on then. And so to have God lead me into this, I attested to one thing, and that's God saying, I'm going to take you. It's not going to be your strength. It's not going to be what you know. you're going to have a humble learning posture in going to all of this stuff. And you need to be continually learning, and I'm going to teach you, but you got to listen to me. And that's basically the short of it. There's so much more to it, but the next 4 years, I got introduced to La Providencia in Honduras, which Providence World was overseeing. That was the organization, that was the place in Honduras that we oversaw. I got introduced to them looking to partner with an orphanage somewhere as a church in Folsom, and we partnered with them. I then joined the board. A year after that, I took a position with them, research and development director, and I raised support for about 7 months. I don't recommend trying to raise support as an attorney; very difficult. And so when we got ready to have,
I've never even stopped to think about that on your behalf, Phil. That's
and I raised about 35% of the salary. So not my lawyer salary, mind you. It was half of what my lawyer salary was. I raised about 35% of what that was. And I went on paternity leave with Kirsten, who's our fourth child, who isn't just getting ready to graduate.
Right.
And we had just had her. I went on paternity leave, and I felt God saying, "Do you trust me?" And I said, "I don't know. I guess we're going to find out," because I took that as him calling me to say, "You need to leave the firm and just go out in faith." So I did. I left the firm in September of. I left in October. I told them in September of 2008. If you remember September of 2008, I told them on a Friday. On Monday is when the market started crashing.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, okay, good timing." When I have 35% of my, so I went from making a whole lot of money in 2008 to making $19,000 in 2009 when we just had our fourth kid. And God brought me into this. And again, it was just learning posture, understanding all this stuff. But as I said, there's a whole lot more to the story as you might imagine, but it was just a ton of discernment, surrounding myself with people who love me, having conversations with them, reading a lot of scripture, praying a lot, hearing God's voice a lot, and just hearing God. Basically, the short of it is the verse that, you talked about, verses, and this is the backyard Bible study, the shed Bible study,
backshed Bible study,
backshed Bible study.
Hit us in there.
There it is. And so Psalm 112:7, God put on my heart, He is not afraid of bad news. His heart is firm, trusting the Lord. Because during 2008, 2009, there was bad news after bad news after bad news. The crash of the market, the ministry actually went through a transition. The leader left. I took over in June of 2009 in a Honduran ministry. We had a community in Honduras. We oversaw the coup in Honduras happened 2 weeks after I took over as president, and it shut down everything. We had no teams were allowed to go there. We had very little money. I didn't know any of the donors. I was taken over, and I just went to actually under the bridge in Folsom. I was reading Psalm 112:7, and I read that, and God spoke to me, and He said, "Phil, I know, yes, you're incompetent to do this on your own, but I'm not. And I'll give you every bit of wisdom and discernment you need to do what you need to do." That was 2009. And I remember it was like yesterday. Every time I walk there, I remember it. And I've heard that verse over and over and over again over the last 15 years or so, or however long that's been, I guess 13 years. And I love doing what I get to do. And I love how God's kind of shaped it and taken me down these trails. And as I've said, the one thing that is kind of my story in a nutshell is I feel like I'm following the breadcrumb that God's puts down for me, and I go to that breadcrumb, and then He shows me another one. And He lets me see just far enough ahead. And if you know DISC as a high I who loves long-term vision and going out, and He knows me well enough that if He gave me more, I'd get so distracted with all these other things. So I just got to see that thing in front of me, and I go, and then I get to see the next thing. And I just love being able to do that.
Well, in what I love in this entire conversation, Phil, is that so often we make such a big deal about strengths, lining up strengths, giftedness, and all of those, lining all that up, and then pursuing those things in those areas. And I'm a big fan of Strength Finder. That was a big
I
one
love
we
Strength
got
Finders.
people into and all that. And yet, it starts to become ironic when God takes someone and says, you've prepared all these other things, but I'm going to take you this direction and use you in a way that you never would have imagined. And I love that, because in that, God gets the credit, you don't.
100%.
And
the funny thing about it too is is the 100% God gets credit. There's no other explanation.
Right.
And even, I mean, I wish I could tell you the whole story, because time and time again, I said it makes no sense that our ministry still exists. The only explanation that it's God's, the only explanation. I was so clueless coming into it, completely like running the thing. Are you kidding me? It took me about 7 years to get a COO. And he came in, he's like, Phil,
How did you
how
pull
are you
this off
still
so far?
here? Because I literally did a budget on Microsoft Word. And so he like got it onto Excel. Like that was the first thing. I mean, he got us a database. He did all these other things. So, I mean, just from an organizational standpoint, the fact that we still existed didn't make any sense. From a financial standpoint, there were months where we had $2 in our bank account as a ministry. And now we had literally 35 people in Honduras on payroll. And some old lady in some random place gave us $25,000. And like literally, that's a true
No,
story.
I
Like,
believe that.
and like, so it's just thing after thing after thing. And now the funny thing, I just laugh about it. 15 years after I first started with the Orphan Care ministry, God brings me into sports ministry, which actually makes sense in
Well,
my life.
that's what
right?
I would have believed for you.
Exactly. That makes sense for Phil Darke. I'm like,
Yeah.
if people know me, I'm a sports guy, like through and through. But God says, if I did that at first, it would have been about you.
Right.
And so now you can actually use those skills for me. And it's awesome. It's
Oh,
awesome. Because
man.
the funny thing is, I'm wearing an Athletes in Action
I
shirt
see
today.
that.
Becca was on staff with Athletes in Action, my wife Becca, before we got married. So if it makes sense, we just keep doing that, right? Or she keeps doing that, and right. But it's not even with Athletes in Action that I'm working with.
How did you two meet?
We met on a mission trip playing soccer.
Yep.
Over in Europe, playing soccer over in Europe. And then she went on staff a few years later. And yeah, I actually was in Hawaii with her when she was on staff. That's where we got engaged. And again, much longer story than we have time for. It's not as simple as, oh, we're in Hawaii together. No, we ended up in Hawaii totally separate. I worked for a judge. She got placed there with Athletes in Action. We had known each other for about 4 years. And then during that time, when we were never attracted to each other, God just said, you're the one, or she's the one for you. So I told her, and it wasn't like ooh, that's amazing. Yes, what I've always hoped for. She goes, well, let me think about it. I don't know. I've never thought about it. So 2 weeks later, we were engaged. That's again a much cooler, a longer story. But
let me tell the rest of them is like, you two are perfect for each other. Yeah. God knew what he was doing and all of that. But
100%. Well, not many women would put up with this story that I just told, right? Like, are you kidding me? We had 4 kids making a very, very, secure income that was more than enough, and to leave that for complete uncertainty. And it's been a complete uncertainty. She is a saint. I mean, it's just amazing. The best mom. She's the PE teacher at Summit. Everyone, she's an amazing PE teacher, but she just does it for others. Everything is other. And she said to me, she actually said at one point in probably early 2000s, Phil, I never want to raise support ever again in my life. I hated raising support at Athletes in Action. And she did. She couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
And so fast forward 4 years, that was before I was even on the radar that I was thinking about doing something. And then a few years later, she said, I go, honey, I really feel led to this. And when she was on board 100%, she said, I go, I know, but you said you never want to raise support again. She says, Phil, I know I said that, but I also know who I married. And so that's wow. Becca in a nutshell. And she's been my biggest fan, biggest supporter ever since. And it's just, I couldn't do it without, I couldn't do all this stuff. And I travel more than I want to sometimes because it's just part of the deal.
Yeah.
And she's just like, yep, I got it at home. I got it. Don't worry about it. You do what you're doing. And now the hope is, the cool thing now is, now that our kids are older,
right,
I'm bringing her in more to the ministry. She's a prayer warrior. And I'm saying, how about you take on the prayer ministry of Providence, and in the sports movement, they need someone for the North America. And so to be able to have her be able to come in there and start doing more of the ministry together, that's a dream. And as our kids are getting older, we're able to, her ministry in the home is starting to get less and less and less each year. And so it's amazing.
Well, and I love you that you bring that up. I mean, there's something about I got mocked by a friend not too long ago that says every pastor I know uses the word seasons.
Hmm.
And my guilty as charged, but it, it brings to light how seasons in life, have you in one spot, and yet as you're kind of rounding that corner, and your youngest is, what'd you say, 11?
11 now. Yeah.
11. Yeah, a lot of things can change with you too. And I even noticed a few days ago, Becca sending out an email that had to do with trafficking and educating people on
Hmm.
trafficking and so on. And I can see where your hearts are lined up
Yeah.
um, together. And God's going to do some
Well,
fun
what's so
stuff with you
funny
guys
is
together.
Becca struggles saying no. Okay. So that, she struggles saying no to really good things. And I do too, for different reasons. I do because they seem fun and they're shiny objects for me. She does because she loves helping people and she doesn't want to say no to people. And especially when she knows she has giftings in that area. And so her sister literally called her the other day and said, "Hey, we have this position for a women's Bible study leader at our church, and it's a part-time paid position." She goes, "I thought of you. I think you'd be perfect." And she would be perfect. And so as Becca hung up, I said, "The answer is no. You need to just say no." She's like, "I know, but I just want to make sure, God." I go, I already got discernment. It's no. But it's funny because that's the differences in the way we're wired
Yep,
and everything.
totally.
But to see her and to be able to do that, and she says that about seasons. She's like, she goes, "Phil, it's just the season. It's not the season for traveling and I'm going away for a week together." I go, "Honey, this is like the never ending season for us. So don't tell me this is a season anymore. We need to figure out how to go and have a break from the storm in the season."
Totally.
So,
Yeah, no, that's a very real thing. And April and I are learning that exact thing right now. As you very well know, we're
mhm.
heading out in 1 month on our sabbatical, and it is a forced interruption of this season that is very well needed for both of
Yep.
us.
Yep. Yep. And if you don't, that's why with vacation stuff, I literally
Right.
just buy the plane tickets. And she's like, "Well, as long as we can cancel them." I'm like, "We can't. So we're going." So, and we have to do that. And it's just healthy. It's just healthy where and I don't do anything that it's not like going to Hawaii is torture, like we got to just do it, and just figure it out. And we
Well,
do.
in
And people
in
want to help
Sabbath,
too, right?
Sabbath
People
is
want to help.
something that God's put into our hearts
Yep.
and wants us to have. He wants us to rest. He wants us to, um, yeah, all that. I don't have to
Absolutely.
sell you on
Absolutely.
that. Okay, boy, this went quickly.
Yes, it does.
Um, how do we land the plane here? Give me an action item. What's something I can do if I've been watching along, listening along today? That is maybe one or two things that can take me to the next step when it comes to orphan care, when it comes to helping build healthy families of people that are underprivileged. Whether it's an action thing, whether it's an education thing. um, what's the next step for some of us?
Well, like I said, I think for people to just understand what your role is, and that's the thing is I don't know who's listening, and so I think the next biggest action step is to become aware. If you're not already aware of the issues, become aware
Mm,
that what the issues are. And I mean, think Orphan's a great place to do that. If that's where you wanted to go in Pursuit of Orphan Excellence, if you know nothing about orphanages and you know nothing about the crisis, that is a good book to read. If a lot of people don't read anymore, but if you still read, that's a great, it's 14 other authors other than me. So I can say it's a great book because most of them are not me.
yeah, I love
And
that.
all the real meat is other people who are amazing. I mean, the two requirements I had for co-authors on that book were you have to have experiential expertise and you have to have a posture of humility.
Mm,
And they did, and it's amazing, incredible people. So those are two things. And then I just say, there was the great one of our guests on the podcast. He was actually ended up being a co-host for a really long time. He said he had a guy who was 82 years old, and he said, "I can't do foster care, but I can mow lawns." And I can go out and I can take my lawnmower and I can mow the lawns of people who are in foster care, who are in the heat of battle, who have adopted kids, who need help. and I can take that off their plate.
Mm.
So it could be little like that. It
Right.
could be funding something if you have resources. It could be adopting. It could be foster care. It could be going and and partnering with different ministries around the world who are seeking to love these different kids, doing those different things. So whatever you are called into, the last thing I will want you to hear at any point, because when people hear about orphan care, sometimes they hear, oh, I got to adopt, I got to go into foster care. The last thing I want people to hear, if you feel called to do that, by all means. But I actually think that's probably the exception to the rule more than it is the rule. And I think there's been a lot of guilt unintentionally and sometimes intentionally in orphan care ministries saying everyone needs, if we just adopt one kid, if we just take one kid in with foster care, it will take care, it won't take care of everything. That's actually a fallacy, because there's a lot of countries, like you said, Ethiopia is closed. Other countries are closed to adoption. Foster care is not really a thing yet. So family strengthening and poverty alleviation is the only realistic, and that's really the only realistic solution we have. So in your own families, the biggest first action step is love your kids really, really well. Love your wife or your husband really, really well. That's the first action step.
Starts at
home. And then, as part of that's the best way you can love your kids too.
Yeah.
Love your kids really, really well and model that for others and train up others and help others. If you hear of couples that are struggling, pour into them. If you hear of couples that need dates, take their kids for the night and just babysit them. So,
well, in all reality, when a child is growing up in an environment where the parents are a disaster, and it's either a single parent family where the one parent is completely checked out of their life and not around, or it could be a situation where the parents are together but they're emotionally divorced, and that child is having to process all of that in so many ways. That child is raising themselves, and is an orphan in so many ways.
Absolutely.
And so I love what you're saying about building into your own marriage and your own family to make that a healthy environment, because there are a lot of kids running around out there raising themselves, and,
absolutely,
and don't even realize they're orphans.
And I talked we landed already. We're now taxiing, waiting for the gate. Taxi. And so, but I will say that too, like in your neighborhoods, whether it's mentoring, whether it's coaching, that's a huge need. And sometimes you'll be the only parent that a kid in your community, in your church might have. And so, and even if they have parents in their home, and that's the thing, we have social orphans and we have, poverty orphans, and we have what, traditionally are known as orphans. And so that the vast majority of the vulnerable children around the world are social or poverty orphans, or their parents just aren't present fully for them for whatever reason.
Yeah. Well, you got me thinking, and it made me think I need to get on here. I have some friends that started up a ministry over in the Bay Area called Foster the Bay. The team, I think Foster the City is what
Foster the City. Now. Yep.
And just a great way that they have gone to help alleviate the foster care mess over there. And so I'm gonna
definitely get Dave Carlson. If Dave's your buddy, then
Dave. You just so you know, like this is how crazy. You and I have never mentioned his name together.
Nope, never.
But I've known Dave for probably 20 plus years, and he and Becky were very influential in us adopting. So as we started to have this belief that God was leading us towards adoption, we sat down with the two of them and their kids. And this family has, I think they have 5 adopted kids plus 3 biologicals or something like that. But anyway, they walked us through the whole thing. So I'm gonna get Dave on here.
Get him on. I actually had his daughter, one of those kids, in my class at William Jessup when I taught
that's
there.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and he guest lectured for one of the classes. So, great dude.
So we'll get Dave, and oh my goodness, he's his buddy over there. That's kind of leading the whole thing up right now. So
I just sat with him at a table at a Christian Alliance for Orphans thing, and I'm blanking on his name too. So we'll remember it later.
He used to run a band that sang up at Hume Lake. That's the best part. I'll come up with it later.
We'll get it.
Hey, let me pray as we close ourselves out here.
Sounds
That was a
good.
great way to taxi to the gate with me, Phil.
Absolutely.
Um, Lord, thank you for just this time this morning, and I thank you for just opening our eyes to what's going on out there in the orphan world. And I pray that we truly would keep our eyes open, that we would see beyond what's on the surface and understand that it's not just a situation that as was thought many years ago, that an orphanage would solve the orphan crisis, and yet we find it even making it worse. Lord, help us to just see the big picture, to listen to what you're doing, to what you are calling us to, and to act accordingly, whether we think it's in our gifting or not. And thank you for Phil. Thank you for Becca and their family. I pray that you would bless them as they continue on, and help them to be sensitive to your Spirit's leading, Lord. And I just thank you in Jesus' name for this morning. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you, Phil.
Yeah.
That's great. And thank you for all of you that were joining along. Some great comments that came along the way. Also, as we were in the middle of our conversation there, Phil, someone dropped in a link to a conversation with Gary Haugen,
Fantastic.
right there. So that's
Love it.
in the comments section. And Barb, I love what you said. God promises he will provide everything we need, and he always does. So,
Yep. Amen.
so true. If you come back next week, we are going to have, let's see here if I can come up with all my names. Heather Matsky. Heather, no. What is Andy Matsky's wife? What is wrong with me? Alternatives Pregnancy Center. Heidi Matsky. I've known Heidi for years, and I don't know why I just blanked on her name. Heidi is going to be with us in the back shed next week. For those of you that go to Sunrise, you know that she will be highlighted in both of our services Sunday morning, and then I'll have her on backshed to talk about what Alternatives is doing in the world to influence young ladies to keep their babies. And then obviously we're going to have a conversation of how all of that plays out in this politically charged climate right now with the potential Supreme Court decision coming. So next week's episode should be quite the doozy for all of us. So looking forward to having Heidi here again. Phil, thank you so much for joining me. We look forward to seeing you all again next week. Have a great week. God bless you. See ya.